Nobody tells you on the first day, but there's a question that science took decades to dare to ask out loud. What makes us human? Not intelligence, not language, not the ability to cry in airports. There's something older, stranger, and more revealing than all of that. And the answer, as is almost always the case when it comes to our species, is at once brilliant and slightly disgusting. Think about this. At this very moment, in every corner of the planet, millions of people are making decisions. Complex decisions, absurd decisions, profoundly human decisions. What to wear, not what to eat, or where to go, or who to call. What to wear. And that decision, so every day that we don't even register it as one, hides within it a 170,000-year story that nobody told you in school. Let's start at the beginning, which in this case turns out to be a rather uncomfortable zoological problem. If you step back far enough and look at humans the way a Martian biologist who just landed would, the first thing they notice is something scandalously obvious. We're strange, not in the poetic sense of unique and special, but in the literal sense that we have no fur. Gorillas have fur. Bears have fur. Boars, beavers, Bengal tigers, Arctic foxes, and practically every large mammal that has walked this planet over the last several million years has fur, and we don't. Well, we have something, of course, but compared to the rest, it's like showing up to a costume contest with a sticker on your forehead. Technically, it counts, but nobody's going to be impressed. Scientists have long debated why this happened, and the most solid theory is this. At some point in our evolutionary history, our ancestors left the forests, moved into open plains, and started doing something no other great primate was doing: running. Not short sprints, but long, exhausting pursuits under a scorching sun. And it turns out that fur, which is fantastic for retaining heat, is a nightmare when you need to dissipate heat quickly. So we gradually lost it. And in exchange, we developed something that sounds modest in biology textbooks, but is, in practice, extraordinary: sweat glands. Millions of them. Between 2 and 4 million distributed across the entire body. We are the sweatiest species on the planet, and that is not an insult. It is one of the best-kept secrets of our evolutionary success. We sweat better than anyone. We cool our bodies with an efficiency no African carnivore can match. We can chase a gazelle for hours until it, not us, collapses from the heat. Human endurance is a biological marvel disguised as a social inconvenience. The problem is that the very system that makes us formidable hunters under the equatorial sun leaves us completely exposed the moment the temperature drops. A furless body, designed to sweat, loses heat at an alarming rate in cold environments. And this is where the story takes its first unexpected turn, because the obvious solution, wrapping yourself in something, didn't arrive when the cold did. It arrived earlier. Much earlier. For years, the standard story was simple and satisfying. Humans left Africa, found winters, got cold, and invented clothing. Clean, logical, easy to memorize for an exam. But the data doesn't add up. Genetic evidence places the origin of clothing between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago. And humans didn't begin leaving Africa en masse until around 70,000 years ago. That leaves a gap of tens of thousands of years that the cold weather argument cannot explain. Why were we wearing clothes long before we needed them to avoid freezing? The answer came from the most improbable place, not from an archaeological site or a cave with rock paintings. It came from lice. Yes, lice. Stay with that for a moment. If this kind of story moves you as much as it moves me, like and subscribe, because there are many more waiting for you. And tell me in the comments, did you ever imagine that the answer to such a big question could come from something so small? A team of researchers decided to study the evolutionary history of human lice with the same rigor others apply to galaxies or proteins. And what they discovered quietly rewrote one of the most important chapters in the history of our species. Humans host two distinct types of lice, those that live in the hair and those that live in clothing, in seams, in the folds of fabric, in the warm, dark corners that only exist if there is a garment to create them. These two populations are genetically distinct. One evolved from the other at a precise point in time, and that matters in a way that is hard to overstate. Clothing lice cannot survive on bare skin. They need fabric. They need the specific microhabitat that only a garment generates. Therefore, the moment that second species of louse appeared is, in all probability, the moment humans began wearing clothes on a regular and sustained basis. And when the researchers calculated when that genetic divergence occurred, they found a date between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. An insect that causes collective panic in schools and ruins summers turned out to be the most precise chronicler of the moment our species decided to cover itself. Lice have been keeping track. They always were. Nobody just thought to ask them. So if it wasn't the cold that pushed us toward clothing, what was it? The first answer is pragmatic and a little anticlimactic. Basic physical protection. Walking for hours through terrain dense with vegetation, rocks, insects, and a sun beating down on furless skin is an experience that generates cuts, bites, burns, and chafing in industrial quantities. A simple piece of animal material between skin and environment isn't fashion. It's common sense. It reduces infections. It reduces wear. It makes the day slightly less brutal, functional, unglamorous, absolutely reasonable. But almost simultaneously, and this is what turns the story into something genuinely fascinating, something else happened. Humans began to decorate their bodies. Even before evidence of clothing, there are records of the use of colored pigments, especially a reddish-orange mineral called ochre, to paint the skin. 200,000 years ago, someone decided they wanted to look different, that they wanted others to see them differently. And that impulse, that need to visually communicate something about oneself to members of the group, is probably older than clothing itself. What followed isn't hard to imagine. If you're already painting your skin to say something about who you are, the next step is to ask what the animal skin you're wearing says about you. Is it the skin of something powerful? Was I the one who hunted it? Does the way I'm wearing it convey something I want others to perceive? In that moment, without industry, without commerce, without global trends, on an African savanna 150,000 years ago, something was being born that we would recognize perfectly today. The idea that what you wear speaks for you. This transition, from practical object to social symbol, was not an accident or an exception. It was universal. In absolutely every human culture on record, clothing has always carried a symbolic weight that goes far beyond covering the body. Those with authority dressed differently. Ceremonies required specific garments. The dead were buried with clothes appropriate for the journey that awaited them. There are textile fragments, tens of thousands of years old, that were already dyed in multiple colors, not because it was warmer, but because it meant something different, because it said something that could not be said any other way. No other animal does this. Peacocks display plumage, octopuses change color, but none of them chooses what to project based on who they're going to see tomorrow, what social role they need to convey, or how they want to be remembered. That dimension is exclusively ours. and it is ancient. Far more ancient than most people imagine. What transformed clothing from a social signal into critical survival technology was climate. Between 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, the Earth entered a series of glacial cycles of a brutality that is difficult to imagine from the comfort of the present. Temperatures plummeted. Ice advanced. Entire regions of the planet became uninhabitable. Populations of large animals collapsed. Water sources disappeared. And the human population, already small, was reduced to a number that paleoanthropologists estimate at between 10 and 30,000 individuals at its lowest point. We were on the edge, not in the dramatic, metaphorical sense in which that phrase is used today, but in the literal sense that we nearly aren't here to tell the story. The groups that survived that period had something the others did not. They had sophisticated clothing. Not skins simply draped over the body, but tailored garments, fitted, layered, sealed at the wrists and neck, the points where blood vessels run closest to the surface and heat escapes most rapidly. The difference between a rough hide and a well-constructed garment was not a matter of comfort. It was the difference between dying within hours or surviving the night. And the key to that sophistication was a tiny tool that deserves more recognition than it gets. In a cave in Siberia, the oldest needle with a true eye was found, an object approximately 50,000 years old, made from the hollow bone of a bird, polished with a precision that is hard to believe anyone achieved with the resources available at the time. A needle with an eye means thread. Thread means stitching. Stitching means garments with deliberate shapes, fitted to the body, capable of trapping heat efficiently. Someone looked at that piece of bone and visualized something that did not yet exist. They calculated how to pierce the thinnest end without breaking it. They tried, failed, adjusted, and tried again until they succeeded. And then they used that object to join two pieces of material with a reproducible, controlled stitch. That is not survival instinct. It is abstract thinking applied to a concrete problem. It is engineering. What very few people know is that we were not the only ones doing it. The Neanderthals, that human species that coexisted with us for thousands of years and that for decades was portrayed as a clumsy, primitive version of what we would become, also made clothing. There is solid evidence that they processed animal hides systematically, used specific tools to work leather, and managed animal carcasses in ways that suggest the goal was the skin as much as the meat. Their anatomy speaks as well. More compact bodies, shorter limbs, a fat distribution adapted to the cold. They had been facing severe winters for centuries. Clothing for them was not an option. It was a necessity. And in that same Siberian cave where the needle appeared, in the same sediment layers, ornaments were found, perforated and polished, that belonged to the Denisovans, a third human species of which we knew almost nothing until 2010, when a fragment of finger bone revealed their existence. People of whom we know almost nothing were already thinking not just about covering themselves, but about how what they wore looked. This raises a question that is hard to shake once it appears. Is clothing something exclusively human, or is it something that any creature sufficiently intelligent, sufficiently social, and sufficiently exposed to cold will inevitably invent? The convergence between such different species suggests there may be something almost logical, almost predictable, in the path from naked body to tailored garment. That clothing, in some profound sense, is the natural conclusion of being what we are. The last great leap in this story happened without a clear founding moment. At some point, humans began working not just with hides, but with plant fibers, spinning them, braiding them, weaving them. The oldest plant fibers we know of are around 30,000 years old and were already dyed in several colors when they were deposited in the cave where we found them. Even then, someone had decided that the material should not only function, it should communicate. With weaving came something that changed the logic of clothing forever, the possibility of having different garments for different purposes. One thing for the cold, another for the heat, another for ritual, another for work, another for mourning. Clothing ceased to be an object and became a system of expression so sophisticated that it ended up generating trade routes, financing empires, and triggering wars. Silk alone reconfigured the politics of half of Eurasia, all of it starting from someone who looked at a piece of bone and thought they could do something with it. Why do we get dressed? The honest answer is that there was never a single reason. There were many, overlapping, feeding into one another in a process that lasted tens of thousands of years. We started to protect skin from what damaged it. We continued because we discovered that what we wore said things we didn't know how to say any other way. We kept going because without it we would have died. And we turned it into art, into industry, into identity, because we are the kind of animal that cannot help giving meaning to everything it touches. What you're wearing right now is not just clothing. It is the result of 170,000 years of decisions made by people who didn't know they were leaving something for you. The person who discovered that a well-placed hide reduced cuts. The one who found that the color of what they wore changed how others saw them. The one who spent hours perfecting a bone needle in the darkness of a Siberian cave so that their children would have a better chance of seeing spring. Every choice you make this morning in front of your wardrobe connects to all of them in a way that is neither metaphor nor poetry. It is archaeology in real time. You're wearing the longest story that exists. If you made it this far, it means this kind of story moves something in you too. And that makes me very glad. Like it? If you enjoyed it, subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments which part of all this left you most thoughtful. See you in the next one.